The antiseptic smell of Children's Hospital Seattle clung to my clothes like a persistent ghost, following me home after another sleepless night at Connor's bedside. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass of the elevator in my law firm's downtown building, watching the city wake up 20 floors below. The coffee in my paper cup had gone cold hours ago, but I gripped it anyway, needing something solid to anchor me in this surreal nightmare that had become my life. 10 months. That's how long Connor had been the center of my universe. How long I'd convinced myself that single motherhood was not just manageable, but empowering. I'd built a careful life around the lie that we didn't need anyone else, that my fierce love and determination were enough to protect us both from the complicated truth of his paternity. The elevator chimed softly as it reached the 42nd floor, where Brennan and Associates occupied half the building. The familiar sight of mahogany paneling and cream-colored carpets usually brought comfort. But today, everything felt foreign, like I was seeing it through a film of exhaustion and fear. My secretary, Maria, looked up from her desk with concern etched across her features. "Any word from the doctors?" she asked gently, her voice carrying the careful tone people use around mothers with sick children. I shook my head, unable to trust my voice. The pediatric oncologist's words from yesterday morning still echoed in my mind with crystal clarity. "We need a complete family medical history, Catherine. Genetic disorders, hereditary conditions, anything that might help us understand what we're dealing with. The biopsy results are concerning." Concerning. Such a clinical word for the terror that had taken residence in my chest, making every breath feel insufficient. The tiny lump on Connor's neck that I'd first noticed 3 weeks ago during his bath had grown despite the antibiotics. Now Dr. Reeves was using words like lymphoma and aggressive treatment protocols, while I sat there nodding like I understood, like any of this made sense. The worst part was the question I couldn't answer. Family history. I'd given them my side easily enough. My grandmother's breast cancer, my father's heart condition, the diabetes that ran through my mother's line like a stubborn weed. But when they asked about Connor's father, I'd stumbled, mumbled something about limited contact, promised to get back to them with information. Information I couldn't provide without destroying the careful fortress of secrets I'd built around our life. My office felt smaller than usual, the law books and case files that normally represented order and control now seeming like props in someone else's life. I set my cold coffee on the desk and sank into my chair, pulling out my phone with trembling fingers. The screen displayed 17 missed calls from the hospital, each one a small knife twist of anxiety. I'd spent 2 years convincing myself that Cole Morrison was a chapter best left closed, a mistake wrapped in expensive suits and dangerous charm that I'd been smart to escape. I'd changed cities, changed my name back to Reynolds, created an entire identity built around the fiction that Connor's father was irrelevant to our story. But as I stared at the phone, I realized how naive that belief had been. Genetics don't care about new identities or carefully constructed narratives. If Connor inherited something from Cole's side of the family, something that could save his life or explain his condition, my pride was a luxury I could no longer afford. The contact information was still there, buried deep in an encrypted folder on my laptop that I'd told myself I kept only for legal protection. Cole Morrison's private number, the one he'd given me during those 6 months when I thought I might be falling in love with a successful businessman instead of becoming entangled with one of the most powerful crime bosses on the West Coast. I'd discovered the truth 3 months into our relationship, stumbled across documents in his home office that painted a picture so different from the man who brought me flowers and cooked dinner in his kitchen that I'd initially convinced myself it was some kind of mistake. Money laundering, racketeering, connections to families whose names appeared in federal indictments. The evidence had been overwhelming and terrifying. The confrontation had been brief and brutal. Cole hadn't denied anything, hadn't tried to explain or justify. He'd simply looked at me with those dark eyes that had once made me feel cherished and said, "Now you know." As if that explained everything. As if learning I was sleeping with a criminal was just another milestone in our relationship. I'd left that night, taking only my clothes and my dignity, and discovered I was pregnant 2 weeks later in a clinic bathroom in Portland, staring at 2 pink lines that changed everything. I'd never told him. Never even considered it. The child growing inside me deserved better than a father whose business associates were featured on FBI wanted posters. But now, as I listened to the phone ring in the children's ward where my baby lay connected to monitors and IV lines, I realized that what Connor deserved most was to live. Everything else, my fear, my pride, my carefully constructed new life, was secondary to that fundamental truth. The number connected after 3 rings. Catherine. His voice was exactly as I remembered it, smooth and confident with an undertone of steel that had once sent shivers down my spine. Not a question, not surprise, just acknowledgement, as if he'd been expecting my call for 2 years. Cole. I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles white against the black plastic. I need to talk to you. Where are you? The immediacy of the question caught me off guard. No pleasantries, no demands for explanation about my disappearance. Just practical assessment, as if he was already calculating distances and logistics. Seattle. But Cole, this isn't... I'm not calling because I want to see you. I need information. A pause. In the background, I could hear muffled voices, the sound of a door closing. What kind of information? I closed my eyes, the words burning my throat like acid. Medical information. About your family. Genetic history. Another pause. Longer this time. When he spoke again, his voice had shifted. Become more focused. Are you sick? Not me. The words came out in a whisper. My son. The silence that followed stretched so long I wondered if the call had dropped. When Cole spoke again, his voice was carefully controlled. How old? 10 months. I could hear him calculating, could almost see him counting backwards in his mind to arrive at the conclusion that would change everything between us. I'll be there in 4 hours. Cole? No, that's not... I just need medical records, family history. I don't need you to come here. 4 hours, Catherine. Text me the hospital address. The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone in the sudden silence of my office. Outside, Seattle continued its morning routine, unaware that my carefully constructed world had just tilted on its axis. I'd made the call to save Connor's life, but I'd also set in motion something I wasn't prepared for. Cole Morrison didn't make offers. He made statements. And I'd just learned that some doors, once opened, could never be closed again. My hands shook as I typed out the hospital address, each letter feeling like another step toward a future I couldn't control. But as I looked at the framed photo of Connor on my desk, his bright eyes and soft smile captured during one of his healthy moments, I knew I'd make the same choice again. Some risks were worth taking when the stakes were everything you loved. The private elevator that whisked us to the 47th floor of the Morrison Tower moved with the silent efficiency of engineered perfection. I stood rigid against the polished steel wall, hyper-aware of Cole's presence beside me. The subtle scent of his cologne. Something expensive and masculine that hadn't changed in 2 years. He hadn't spoken since we'd left the hospital parking garage, where Connor lay sleeping under the watchful eye of nurses and machines that beeped with mechanical precision. The pediatric oncologist, Dr. Reeves, had been thorough in her explanation of what they needed. Complete family medical history going back 3 generations. Any incidents of childhood cancers, genetic disorders, autoimmune conditions. Information that could mean the difference between an aggressive treatment protocol that might save Connor's life, or a gentler approach that could allow the disease to progress beyond treatment. Hodgkin's lymphoma in children has an excellent prognosis when caught early, she'd explained, her voice carrying the practiced calm of someone who delivered devastating news with hope. But we need to understand what we're dealing with. Genetic predisposition can help us tailor the treatment more effectively. Cole had listened to every word with the focused intensity I remembered, asking precise questions about staging, treatment timelines, survival rates. He'd spoken to Connor's medical team with the authority of someone accustomed to gathering information and making strategic decisions. When Dr. Reeves mentioned the need for genetic counseling and the possibility of bone marrow compatibility testing, Cole had simply nodded and said, "Whatever he needs." The elevator doors opened into a reception area that screamed understated power. Marble floors, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay, and abstract art that probably cost more than most people's homes. A woman in her 30s with perfectly styled blonde hair looked up from a mahogany desk, her smile professional but warm. "Mr. Morrison, Mrs. Morrison," she said, rising gracefully. "Dr. Yamamoto is waiting for you in conference room A." Mrs. Morrison. I didn't correct her, though the name felt foreign on my tongue after 2 years of being Catherine Reynolds. Cole's hand settled on the small of my back, a gesture of possession and protection that I was too emotionally drained to resist. Dr. Yamamoto turned out to be a soft-spoken man in his 50s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and an impressive collection of diplomas on his office wall. He welcomed us into a conference room dominated by a polished table and windows that offered a panoramic view of the city I'd once called home. Mr. Morrison explained the situation, Dr. Yamamoto said, settling behind a laptop computer. "I have the Morrison family medical records going back 4 generations, including detailed genetic testing that was done on several family members 5 years ago as part of a research study on hereditary cancer markers." I felt Cole's eyes on me, but I kept my gaze fixed on the doctor. This was about Connor, I reminded myself. My feelings about Cole's family's thoroughness in documenting their genetic history were irrelevant compared to my son's life. "The good news," Dr. Yamamoto continued, "is that there's no significant history of childhood lymphomas in the Morrison line. However, there are some factors that Dr. Reeves should be aware of." He turned his laptop screen toward us, displaying what looked like a complex family tree marked with various medical annotations. Cole's paternal grandfather had early-onset leukemia that responded exceptionally well to treatment. His maternal uncle survived a rare form of bone cancer as a teenager. Both cases suggest a genetic profile that's actually resistant to certain types of blood cancers, not predisposed to them. The relief that flooded through me was so intense I felt dizzy. I gripped the edge of the conference table, my knuckles white against the dark wood. "What does that mean for Connor?" "It means," Dr. Yamamoto said gently, "that his genetic profile likely includes some natural resistance factors. The treatment protocol Dr. Reeves develops can be more aggressive because his body should handle it better. It improves his prognosis significantly." I closed my eyes, feeling tears of relief spill down my cheeks. 2 years of pride and independence seemed insignificant compared to this moment, this information that could save my son's life. When I opened my eyes, Cole was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "There's something else," Dr. Yamamoto said, his tone shifting slightly. "The genetic markers that provide this resistance are typically passed from father to child. For Connor to have inherited them, paternity would need to be." He paused, glancing between Cole and me. "Confirmed," Cole finished quietly. "Dr. Yamamoto, I'll need you to coordinate with Children's Hospital for paternity testing and bone marrow compatibility analysis. Whatever Connor needs." The ride down to the parking garage was silent, except for the soft hum of the elevator. My mind was spinning with the implications of what we'd learned, the relief of Connor's improved prognosis battling with the reality of what this meant for the careful boundaries I'd constructed around our life. "I should get back to the hospital," I said as the elevator doors opened. "Connor will be waking up soon, and he gets scared when I'm not there." "I'll drive you," Cole said, and it wasn't a request. His car was exactly what I'd expected. A black Mercedes with leather seats that probably cost more than my monthly salary and technology that made it feel more like a computer than a vehicle. I settled into the passenger seat, hyper-aware of the luxury surrounding me, the stark contrast to the life I'd built for Connor and myself. "You've been watching us," I said, as Cole pulled out of the parking garage. It wasn't a question. Yes. The simple acknowledgement sent a chill down my spine. For how long? Since you left Portland. His voice was matter-of-fact, as if surveillance of his ex-girlfriend and unknown child was perfectly reasonable. You're good at disappearing, Catherine. It took my people 6 months to find you. His people. The reminder of who Cole really was, what his business entailed, crashed over me like cold water. Why? Why didn't you contact me? Cole was quiet for several blocks, navigating Seattle traffic with the easy confidence of someone who'd driven these streets before. Because you left for a reason. I assumed if you'd wanted me to know about the pregnancy, you would have told me. I was protecting him, I said, the words coming out more defensively than I'd intended. From your world. From the dangers that come with being your son. And now? He glanced at me, his dark eyes unreadable. Now that he needs medical care that requires genetic information, treatment that costs hundreds of thousands of dollars, now that you've opened this door, the question hung between us like a challenge. I stared out the window at the Seattle streets, watching ordinary people live ordinary lives, wondering if Connor and I would ever have that luxury again. I called you for medical information, I said finally. Nothing more. Cole's laugh was low and humorless. You called the head of the most powerful crime family on the West Coast to ask about genetic disorders. Did you think there wouldn't be consequences to that decision? The hospital appeared ahead of us, its modern glass facade reflecting the late afternoon sun. Cole pulled into the circular drive reserved for emergency vehicles and VIP visitors, apparently unconcerned with parking regulations. What kind of consequences? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Cole turned off the engine and faced me fully. The kind where your son becomes a target for anyone who wants to hurt me. The kind where your quiet life as Catherine Reynolds becomes impossible to maintain. The kind where protection becomes a necessity, not a choice. My blood turned to ice. What are you saying? I'm saying, Cole said quietly, that the moment you contacted me, you brought Connor into my world whether you intended to or not. My enemies now know I have a son. They know where to find you both. The question isn't whether you want my protection. It's whether you want it voluntary or involuntary. The threat was delivered so calmly, so matter-of-factly, that it took a moment for the full impact to hit me. I stared at this man I'd once loved, this stranger who shared DNA with my child, trying to process what he was telling me. You're threatening us, I whispered. I'm protecting you, he corrected. Whether you understand it or not, whether you want it or not. Connor is my son, Catherine. That makes him mine to protect, and that makes you mine to protect as well. Before I could respond, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Children's Hospital, and my heart leaped into my throat. I answered on the second ring. Mrs. Reynolds, this is Nurse Patricia from the pediatric unit. Connor's awake and asking for you. Dr. Reeves would also like to speak with you about beginning treatment as soon as possible. I'll be right there, I said, already reaching for the door handle. Cole's hand closed over mine before I could open the door. Catherine, this conversation isn't over. I met his gaze, seeing in those dark eyes the same dangerous intensity that had once thrilled and terrified me. No, I agreed, pulling my hand free. It's not. But right now, my son needs me. Everything else can wait. As I walked through the hospital's automatic doors, I could feel Cole watching me, could sense that my carefully constructed life was already changing in ways I couldn't control. The genetic information that might save Connor's life had come with a price I was only beginning to understand. Behind me, I heard the Mercedes engine start, but I didn't look back. I couldn't afford to. Not when Connor was waiting for me. Not when his treatment couldn't wait for me to figure out how to navigate the dangerous waters Cole's return had created. But as the elevator carried me up to the pediatric floor, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just stepped into a trap of my own making. One where the only way out was through a man who'd already made it clear that walking away wasn't an option anymore. The pediatric oncology ward at 3 a.m. had a peculiar quality of suspended time. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead with mechanical persistence while most of the world slept, unaware that in rooms like Connor's, parents maintained vigils that redefined the meaning of forever. I sat in the uncomfortable hospital chair that had become my second home, watching my son's chest rise and fall with the steady rhythm of medicated sleep. The first round of chemotherapy had begun that morning. Dr. Reeves had explained the protocol with careful optimism: 4 cycles of treatment over 12 weeks, followed by radiation if necessary. Connor had taken the IV insertion better than I had, his 10-month-old curiosity more focused on the colorful tubes and machines than the gravity of what they represented. "He's strong," the night nurse Janet had told me during her rounds. "Some kids his age struggle more with the treatment, but he's holding steady. Good vitals, good response to the medications." Good response. I clung to those words like a lifeline, even as I watched for signs of the side effects Dr. Reeves had warned me about: nausea, fatigue, increased susceptibility to infection. The genetic resistance factors from Cole's family history meant Connor could tolerate more aggressive treatment, but it was still chemotherapy. Still poison designed to kill cancer cells before they killed him. My phone buzzed softly against the small table beside my chair. A text message from an unknown number, though I suspected I knew who it was from. "How is he?" I stared at the screen for a long moment, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. 3 days had passed since Cole had dropped me at the hospital with his ultimatum about protection and consequences. 3 days during which I'd thrown myself into Connor's treatment, meeting with doctors and nurses, learning about medication schedules and side effects, pretending that the outside world and its complications didn't exist. But at 3 a.m, in the hollow quiet of a children's hospital, pretending became impossible. Starting to respond to treatment, I typed back, "Doctor says genetic factors are helping." The response came immediately. "Good. We need to talk." I looked at Connor, sleeping peacefully despite the IV lines and monitoring equipment, and made a decision that felt both inevitable and terrifying. "Tomorrow, after his morning treatment session. I'll pick you up at noon." The conversation ended there, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the soft beeping of medical equipment. I'd spent 3 days avoiding the reality of what Cole's re-entry into our lives meant, but I couldn't avoid it forever. The paternity test results had come back within 24 hours, modern technology making genetic truth a matter of simple certainty rather than speculation. Connor Morrison, not Connor Reynolds. The name carried weight I wasn't prepared for, implications that extended far beyond medical records and treatment protocols. Janet appeared in the doorway, her footsteps silent on the polished floor. "How are you holding up, honey?" I managed a tired smile. "1 hour at a time." "That's all any of us can do," she said, checking Connor's monitors with practiced efficiency. "You know, in 30 years of pediatric nursing, I've learned that the kids who have family support always do better. It's not just about medical care, it's about feeling secure, knowing they're loved and protected." Family support. The words echoed strangely in the quiet room. For 2 years, family had meant just Connor and me against the world. Now, suddenly, family had expanded to include a man whose business associates appeared in federal indictments, whose protection came with strings I couldn't yet see. "Janet," I said quietly, "what would you do if keeping your child safe meant accepting help from someone dangerous?" The older woman paused in her charting, her expression thoughtful. "Honey, I've seen a lot of families in crisis over the years. Parents who've had to make impossible choices, who've swallowed their pride or their principles to give their children what they needed." She met my eyes directly. "The question isn't whether the help is dangerous. The question is whether refusing it is more dangerous." More dangerous. I thought about Cole's warning, about enemies who might target Connor simply because he was Cole's son, about a 10-month-old baby who couldn't protect himself from threats he didn't understand, couldn't even comprehend. The rest of the night passed slowly, broken by periodic checks from nursing staff and the constant low-level anxiety that had become my permanent state since Dr. Reeves had first mentioned the word cancer. When dawn finally crept through Connor's window, painting the sterile room in soft shades of gold and pink, I felt like I'd aged years in the span of a single night. Connor's morning treatment session went smoothly. He tolerated the additional medications well, even managing to smile at the child life specialist who brought him toys designed to distract from the clinical reality of his situation. Watching him play with colorful blocks while chemotherapy dripped through his IV was surreal. Childhood innocence coexisting with medical necessity in a way that broke my heart and filled me with determination simultaneously. At noon exactly, Cole appeared in the pediatric ward lobby. He looked exactly as I remembered him and completely different at the same time. The expensive suit, the confident posture, the dark eyes that seemed to catalog everything around him, those were unchanged. But there was something new in his expression when he looked at Connor, a softness that hadn't been there during our relationship. "How does this work?" I asked as we walked toward the elevator. "Do I just trust that your definition of protection aligns with mine? Do I pretend not to know what you do for a living?" "We figure it out," Cole said simply. "Together." The word hung between us as the elevator descended. Together. It implied partnership, cooperation, shared decision-making. Everything our relationship had never really been before Connor changed the stakes completely. Cole's choice of restaurant surprised me. A quiet bistro in the university district, rather than the upscale establishments I associated with his lifestyle. We were seated at a corner table that offered privacy, and I noticed clear sightlines to all entrances. Some habits, apparently, never changed. "Talk to me about your concerns," Cole said, after we'd ordered. No preamble, no small talk. Straight to the heart of the matter with characteristic directness. My concerns? I couldn't help the bitter laugh that escaped. "Cole, you're asking me to trust my son's safety to someone whose business involves activities that end up on federal task force reports. You're asking me to accept protection from the very world I tried to escape." "You tried to escape me," he corrected quietly. "Not my world. There's a difference." The distinction was subtle but important. I'd never been afraid of Cole personally, even at his most intimidating, even during our worst arguments. I'd never felt physically threatened by him. It was the implications of his power, the web of violence and illegality that surrounded his business, that had driven me away. "Help me understand," I said. "What does protection mean in practical terms? Do Connor and I disappear into some kind of witness protection scenario? Do we live under guard? Do I give up my career, my independence, everything I've built?" Cole was quiet for a moment, his fingers drumming silently on the table's surface. "It means," he said finally, "that you and Connor are under my protection. No one touches you without answering to me. No one threatens you without consequences. As for the details, living arrangements, security protocols, your career, those are negotiations, not ultimatums." Negotiations. As if my son's safety were a business deal to be hammered out over lunch. But even as the thought irritated me, I recognized the olive branch he was offering. Discussion rather than dictation. "What do you want from us?" I asked. "Really? What's your endgame here?" Cole's expression softened slightly. "I want my son to live. I want him to grow up knowing his father. I want you both safe." He paused. "And I want the chance to fix what I broke 2 years ago." The honesty in his voice caught me off guard. This was closer to the man I'd fallen in love with than the cold crime boss who'd delivered ultimatums in a hospital parking garage. "You can't fix the past, Cole. You can't undo what I learned about your business, or pretend that discovering your real occupation didn't change everything between us. No, he agreed, but I can acknowledge that I should have been honest with you from the beginning. I can admit that keeping you in the dark was selfish and ultimately destructive. And I can promise that if you give me this chance, there won't be secrets between us. No secrets. The offer was tempting and terrifying in equal measure. Complete honesty about his business would mean knowing details I might not want to know, becoming complicit in ways I wasn't prepared for. What about Connor? I asked. What kind of life does the son of a crime boss have? What kind of childhood? A protected one, Cole said immediately. The best education, the best opportunities, the security that comes with unlimited resources. He'll know about the family business when he's old enough to understand it, and he'll choose his own path when the time comes. And if his path leads away from your world, then I'll respect that choice. Cole met my eyes directly. Just as I should have respected your choice 2 years ago, instead of trying to control the situation. The admission surprised me. The Cole I'd known had been many things. Generous, passionate, intelligent. But introspective wasn't typically one of them. Perhaps fatherhood had changed him. Or perhaps the prospect of losing Connor before he ever really knew him had provided perspective he'd lacked before. Our food arrived, but I found I had little appetite. The weight of the decision I was facing pressed down on me like a physical force. Accept Cole's protection and Connor would be safe, but we'd be entering a world where safety came at the cost of moral compromise. Refuse. And I'd be gambling with my son's life based on pride and principle. I need guarantees, I said finally. If I agree to this arrangement, I need to know exactly what I'm agreeing to. Cole nodded, as if he'd expected this. What kind of guarantees? Connor's treatment comes first. Always. No business concerns, no territorial disputes, nothing takes priority over his medical care. Agreed. I want to maintain some form of independence. I'll accept protection, but I won't be a prisoner in a gilded cage. Within reasonable security parameters, agreed. And I want honesty. Real honesty. If there are threats, if there are problems, if there are decisions that affect Connor's safety, I want to know about them. No more secrets. No more protecting me from information I need to make informed choices. Cole was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. That's a dangerous precedent, Catherine. Knowledge can be as dangerous as ignorance in my world. Then maybe, I said quietly, it's time for your world to change. The challenge hung between us, unspoken but clear. I wasn't just asking for protection. I was asking him to reconsider how he operated, to include me as a partner rather than someone to be protected and controlled. All right, Cole said finally. But that works both ways. No more running. No more unilateral decisions about Connor's welfare. We're partners in this, which means we make decisions together. Partners. The word carried more weight than either of us was ready to acknowledge. But as I looked across the table at the father of my child, I realized that partnership might be our only hope of navigating the impossible situation we found ourselves in. I have one more condition, I said. Cole raised an eyebrow. We start slow. I'm not moving into your house tomorrow, and Connor's not suddenly getting bodyguards. We figure out how to make this work gradually, at a pace that doesn't traumatize a sick 10-month-old. A small smile played at the corners of Cole's mouth. Agreed, though I should warn you, gradual might not be an option if threats emerge. Then let's hope they don't, I said, extending my hand across the table. Cole took it, his grip firm and warm and familiar. Deal, Catherine. And for what it's worth, thank you. For trusting me with this. For giving me the chance to be Connor's father. As we shook hands, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just crossed a line I could never uncross. But watching Cole's expression soften as he spoke about being Connor's father, I realized that maybe some lines were meant to be crossed. Maybe some risks were worth taking when they meant giving your child everything you couldn't provide alone, even if it meant accepting protection from the very world you'd tried so hard to escape. The Morrison estate sat on 15 acres of waterfront property, 30 minutes north of Seattle, hidden behind wrought iron gates and mature evergreens that blocked all view from the road. As Cole's Mercedes wound up the private drive, I caught glimpses of manicured grounds, a tennis court, and what appeared to be a separate building that could only be described as a guest house, though it was larger than most people's primary residences. Connor dozed in his car seat, exhausted from his morning treatment session. The chemotherapy was taking its toll despite his genetic advantages. He slept more, ate less, and had developed a rash that Dr. Reeves assured me was normal, but broke my heart nonetheless. When he was awake, though, he was still my curious, cheerful baby, more interested in the tubes and machines than upset by them. "This wasn't what I had in mind when I agreed to gradual," I said as the main house came into view. It was a study in understated luxury, modern lines softened by natural stone and glass, designed to complement rather than dominate the landscape. "Circumstances changed," Cole said simply. The circumstances he referred to had emerged 2 days earlier. A black SUV following me home from the hospital. A man in the grocery store parking lot who'd asked too many questions about Connor's schedule. Small things that might have been coincidence, but that Cole's security team had flagged as reconnaissance. "Someone's testing your defenses," Marcus, Cole's head of security, had explained during a tense meeting in the hospital cafeteria. "Learning your routines, identifying vulnerabilities. It's textbook preparation for an operation. An operation, as if my son were a military target rather than a sick baby." The clinical language hadn't made the threat any less terrifying. "Who?" I'd asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Cole had exchanged a look with Marcus before answering. "Anton Volkov. He runs the Russian operations in Vancouver. We've been competitors for several years." Competitors. Another euphemism for something much more dangerous than business rivalry. Why would he target Connor? "Because he's mine," Cole had said simply. "Because hurting my son would be the most effective way to hurt me." The logic was brutal and clear. Connor wasn't a target because of anything he'd done or any threat he posed. He was a target because he was loved, because his safety mattered to someone Volkov wanted to damage. It was a kind of warfare I'd never imagined, one where innocent children became weapons in conflicts they couldn't understand. The front door of the estate opened before we'd even parked, revealing a woman in her 50s with graying brown hair and kind eyes. She wore jeans and a cable-knit sweater, looking more like someone's favorite aunt than household staff for a crime boss. "That's Elena," Cole said, noting my curious glance. "She's been with the family for 20 years. She helped raise my sister's children." Elena approached our car with the confidence of someone comfortable in her environment, her face lighting up when she saw Connor stirring in his car seat. "So this is the little man," she said, her accent carrying just a trace of something Eastern European. "What a beautiful boy. He has your eyes, Cole, but his mother's stubborn chin." The observation was delivered with such warmth that I found myself smiling, despite my anxiety. Cole had been right to start our transition slowly, but when surveillance had turned into potential threat, slow had become a luxury we couldn't afford. The interior of the house was a revelation. I'd expected ostentation, marble statues, gold fixtures, the kind of over-the-top displays of wealth I associated with criminal enterprises. Instead, I found understated elegance, warm hardwood floors, comfortable furniture arranged for conversation rather than display, and large windows that brought the natural beauty of the grounds inside. "The nursery is ready," Elena said, leading us down a hallway lined with family photographs. "I took the liberty of setting it up near the master suite, but if you'd prefer a different arrangement." She trailed off, clearly uncertain about the sleeping arrangements. I was uncertain about them myself. Cole had offered me my own room with an adjoining nursery, but the practicalities of round-the-clock medical care made proximity logical. The nursery was perfect. A rocking chair positioned near windows that overlooked the sound, a crib that matched Connor's exact specifications for height and mattress firmness, and a small pharmacy of medical supplies organized with hospital-level precision. Dr. Reeves sent over the supply list, Cole explained, noting my surprised expression. Elena coordinated with the hospital to make sure we had everything Connor might need. Elena had done more than coordinate. She'd transformed a guest room into a pediatric care facility that rivaled Connor's hospital room for functionality while maintaining the warmth of a family home. There was even a small refrigerator for medications and a sterilization station for bottles and medical equipment. This must have cost a fortune, I said, running my hand along the rail of the specialized crib. Connor's comfort isn't a budget item, Cole replied. Over the next several hours, I began to understand what life under Cole's protection actually meant. Security cameras covered every angle of the property, though they were discreetly hidden among the landscaping. Marcus and his team maintained a 24-hour presence, rotating between visible patrols and concealed positions. There were protocols for everything: meal deliveries, medical appointments, even walking to the mailbox. "It's temporary," Cole assured me as Marcus ran through the security briefings. "Once we neutralize the Volkov threat, things can return to normal." Normal. I wondered what that word meant in Cole's world, whether the kind of life I'd built for Connor in Seattle could ever truly exist within the sphere of Morrison family influence. Connor's evening routine was disrupted by the new environment, but Elena's grandmother instincts proved invaluable. She'd raised 3 grandchildren, she told me, and had extensive experience with medical needs and nighttime feedings. When Connor fussed despite his medication, she appeared with warm milk and stories that seemed to calm him immediately. "She's magical with children," Cole said, as we watched Elena rock Connor to sleep in the nursery's comfortable chair. My nephew had colic for 6 months, and Elena was the only one who could settle him. Watching this woman, clearly devoted to Cole's family, care for my son with such natural affection, I began to understand how people became part of Cole's world. It wasn't just about money or fear or even loyalty. It was about belonging to something larger than yourself, being part of a family that took care of its own. "How does this work long-term?" I asked once Connor was settled for the night. "Assuming the threat from Volkov is resolved, what happens then? Do Connor and I live here permanently? Do we go back to Seattle? Do we pretend none of this ever happened?" Cole was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on the windows overlooking the sound. The view was spectacular. Lights twinkling across the water, the silhouette of distant islands, a sense of space and freedom that felt almost infinite. "That depends on what you want," he said finally. "I'd like you to stay. Both of you. I'd like the chance to be part of Connor's life every day, not just during medical crises or security threats." The honesty in his voice made my chest tighten. This was what I'd been afraid of. Not the danger or the moral compromises, but the possibility that staying might mean something more complicated than a simple arrangement for Connor's protection. "And what I want?" I asked. "What if what I want conflicts with what's best for Connor's safety? Then we figure out a compromise that protects him while respecting your choices." Compromise. The word seemed to define our entire relationship now. Past, present, and future. Compromise between safety and independence, between love and principle, between the life I'd planned and the reality Connor's illness had created. My phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Reeves. Connor's latest blood work showed good response to treatment, but she wanted to adjust his medication schedule. Another reminder that whatever arrangements Cole and I made, Connor's medical needs would continue to drive our decisions. "I should call her back," I said, holding up the phone. "Use my office," Cole suggested. "It's more private." His office was a study in controlled power. Dark wood, leather chairs, and a desk that could have hosted peace negotiations. But what caught my attention was the wall of monitors displaying various security camera feeds, a constant reminder of the threats that necessitated such precautions. Dr. Reeves was optimistic about Connor's progress, but wanted to discuss the logistics of continuing treatment while we were staying outside the city. She'd coordinated with a private medical service that could provide nursing care and medication administration at the estate, ensuring Connor's treatment schedule wouldn't be disrupted by security concerns. "How is he adjusting to the new environment?" she asked. "Better than I expected," I admitted. "Cole's housekeeper has a gift with children, and the medical setup here is actually superior to what we had at my apartment." "That's good to hear. Stress can impact treatment effectiveness, especially in children Connor's age. If he's comfortable and secure, his body can focus its energy on fighting the cancer." Fighting the cancer. The phrase reminded me why all of this, the compromises, the moral gray areas, the accepting help from a man whose business operated outside the law, was necessary. Connor needed to be healthy before any other considerations mattered. When I returned from the call, I found Cole in the living room, staring into a fire that Elena had built in the massive stone fireplace. He'd changed from his business suit into jeans and a sweater, looking more like the man I'd fallen in love with than the crime boss who'd appeared at the hospital with ultimatums. "Dr. Reeves thinks this arrangement is actually good for Connor," I said, settling into the chair across from him. "The reduced stress, the controlled environment, the medical support. But you're not convinced." It wasn't a question. Cole had always been able to read my moods, my hesitations, the things I didn't say as clearly as the things I did. "I'm terrified," I admitted. "Not of you, not of the house or the security or even the threats. I'm terrified that this will work. That Connor will be healthier and happier here than he ever was in our apartment. That I'll start to depend on this life, this protection, this family that I'm not sure I have a right to claim." Cole's expression softened. "Catherine, you're the mother of my child. You have more right to claim this family than anyone." "Do I?" "I walked away, Cole. I spent 2 years building a life that specifically excluded you. I don't get to come back when it's convenient and pretend those choices don't matter." "No," he agreed. "But you do get to make new choices. Better choices. Choices that put Connor's welfare first." Connor's welfare. It always came back to that. The fundamental truth that trumped pride and fear and the complicated history between Cole and me. My son deserved every advantage, every protection, every opportunity his father's resources could provide. "What would you have done?" I asked quietly. "If I'd told you about Connor from the beginning. If I'd called you 2 years ago instead of disappearing." Cole was quiet for a long moment. "I would have tried to control everything," he said finally. "Your medical care, your living situation, your daily routine. I would have convinced myself it was protection, when it was really just fear of losing something I cared about. And now? Now I know that control is an illusion. Connor got sick, despite all the protection I could have provided. You built a good life for him despite having no resources. The only thing that matters is working together to give him what he needs. Working together. Partnership instead of protection. Collaboration instead of control. It was what I'd asked for during our negotiation, but hearing Cole acknowledge the necessity of it made it feel real in a way it hadn't before. "All right," I said, the decision crystallizing as I spoke. "We try this. Really try it. Not just until the Volkov threat is resolved, but as a genuine attempt to build something that works for all 3 of us." Cole's smile was small but genuine. "What changed your mind?" I thought about Connor sleeping peacefully in his new nursery, about Elena's grandmother instincts and Dr. Reeves's optimism about stress reduction, about the way Cole had looked when he'd spoken about wanting to be part of Connor's daily life, not just his crises. The realization that some risks are worth taking, I said, and that maybe the biggest risk isn't accepting your protection. It's letting pride prevent Connor from having everything he deserves. Outside, the wind picked up off the sound, rattling the windows with a sound like distant thunder. But inside, in the warm circle of firelight, with the sound of Connor breathing peacefully in the next room, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Not quite peace, not yet, but possibility. The chance that love might be stronger than fear, that family might triumph over principle, that sometimes the most dangerous choice was the one that offered the most hope. The revelation came at 3 a.m, delivered by Marcus in the form of photographs spread across Cole's kitchen table like playing cards in a deadly game. I stood in my robe, Connor asleep against my shoulder after a difficult night with medication-induced nausea, staring at surveillance images that redefined everything I thought I understood about our situation. "These were taken 6 months ago," Marcus said, his voice carrying the grim satisfaction of a hunter who'd finally cornered his prey. "Vancouver, outside Volkov's primary operations center." The photograph showed a man I didn't recognize shaking hands with a man I unfortunately did. Mark Chen, my former colleague at the Seattle law firm where I'd worked before Connor's diagnosis forced me to take extended leave. Mark, who'd expressed such concern about my situation, who'd offered to help with legal paperwork for Connor's medical care, who'd asked seemingly innocent questions about our daily routines. "He's been feeding Volkov information for months," Cole explained, his voice carrying a cold fury I'd never heard before. "Your work schedule, Connor's medical appointments, the layout of your apartment building. Everything Volkov needed to plan an operation." I felt sick, and not just from the sleep deprivation and stress. Mark had been kind to me during Connor's illness, understanding about missed deadlines and emergency departures. He'd brought coffee during late-night research sessions and covered for me when I needed to leave for medical appointments. His concern had felt genuine, his friendship real. "How long have you known?" I asked, shifting Connor to my other shoulder as he stirred fitfully. "We suspected for 2 weeks," Marcus replied. "Confirmed it yesterday when we intercepted communications between Chen and Volkov's lieutenant. They're planning to move within the next 48 hours. 48 hours. The timeline hit me like a physical blow. 2 days to what? To kidnap Connor? To hurt him as leverage against Cole? To eliminate the threat we represented to Volkov's operations? "What kind of move?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the details. Cole and Marcus exchanged a look that communicated volumes. "The kind that doesn't leave witnesses," Cole said finally. The clinical language couldn't disguise the reality he was describing. Volkov wasn't planning a kidnapping or a negotiation. He was planning an execution, Connor's and mine, designed to deliver maximum psychological damage to Cole while eliminating any future complications. "But Connor's just a baby," I whispered, the words inadequate to express the horror of targeting an innocent child. "In Volkov's world, that makes him more valuable as a target, not less," Marcus explained with brutal honesty. "The death of a child is designed to break an enemy's will, to make them careless and emotional." I looked at Connor, sleeping peacefully despite the storm of adult violence swirling around him, and felt a rage so pure it surprised me. This innocent child, who'd done nothing but exist, who was fighting cancer with more courage than most adults could muster, had become a target simply because of who his father was. "What do we do?" I asked, the question encompassing both immediate tactics and long-term strategy. "We end this," Cole said simply. "Permanently." The word carried implications I wasn't ready to examine. I'd known intellectually that Cole's business involved violence, but I'd managed to keep that knowledge abstract, theoretical. Now, faced with a direct threat to Connor, the reality of what ending this meant became unavoidable. "How?" I asked. "Chen is meeting with Volkov's people tomorrow night to finalize the operational details," Marcus explained. "We intercept that meeting, gather intelligence about their plan, and then eliminate the threat at its source." eliminate the threat. More euphemisms for actions that would likely result in deaths. Men who would die because they'd planned to hurt my son. The moral calculus was simple and terrible. Their lives against Connor's, their violence against my child's innocence. "I want to know everything," I said, the words surprising me with their firmness. "The plan, the risks, the potential outcomes. All of it." Cole studied my face in the dim kitchen light. "Catherine, some knowledge—" "No," I interrupted. "You promised honesty, real honesty. If Connor and I are targets, if people are going to die to protect us, then I need to understand exactly what that means." For the next hour, Marcus walked me through the operational plan with military precision. Chen would be intercepted on his way to the meeting, questioned about Volkov's timeline and resources, then used to feed false information back to the Russians. Meanwhile, Cole's team would prepare a preemptive strike against Volkov's operations in Vancouver. "What about after?" I asked. "Assuming this works, assuming Volkov is eliminated, what prevents the next ambitious crime boss from seeing Connor as a target?" "Nothing," Cole said bluntly. "That's the reality of this life, Catherine. There will always be threats, always be people who want to hurt me by hurting the people I care about." The people he cared about. The phrase hit me with unexpected force. Somewhere between medical crises and security briefings, between negotiations and compromises, I'd become someone Cole cared about again. Not just the mother of his child, but someone whose welfare mattered to him independently. "How do other families handle it?" I asked. "Crime families, I mean. How do they protect their children?" "Carefully," Cole replied. "With layers of security, controlled environments, limited exposure to the outside world. It's not a normal childhood, but it can be a safe one. A safe childhood at the cost of a normal one." The trade-off was stark, but not complicated. Connor could grow up protected but isolated, privileged but constrained, loved but always aware of the dangers that loving him created. "I need to think," I said, though thinking felt inadequate to the magnitude of the decisions ahead of us. "Time is a luxury we don't have," Marcus warned. "If we're going to act, it has to be tonight. Tonight." In a few hours, Cole would leave to confront the men who wanted to kill his son. He would engage in violence to protect Connor, would cross lines that couldn't be uncrossed, would take actions that would bind us all more tightly to his world. "What do you need from me?" I asked. Cole's expression softened slightly. "I need you to trust me, to believe that everything I'm doing is to protect Connor and you." Trust. The foundation of any relationship, but especially complicated when that relationship existed in the shadow of criminal enterprise. Could I trust a man whose business involved activities that violated every principle I'd been raised with? Could I trust my own judgment when that man was also the only thing standing between my son and people who wanted to kill him? "I do trust you," I said, realizing as I spoke that it was true. "With Connor's life. With mine. I trust you to do whatever it takes to keep us safe." Relief flickered across Cole's features. "That's all I need." As Marcus left to coordinate with the security team, Cole and I returned to Connor's nursery. Our son slept peacefully in his specialized crib, blissfully unaware of the violence being planned in his name. His latest blood work showed continued improvement. The aggressive treatment protocol made possible by his genetic advantages was working better than Dr. Reeves had dared hope. "He's going to be okay," Cole said quietly, his voice carrying a certainty I envied. "The cancer, yes. But what about everything else? What about growing up knowing that people want to hurt him because of who his father is?" Cole was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on Connor's sleeping form. "I grew up knowing that," he said finally. "It shapes you, but it doesn't have to break you. Connor will be strong because he has to be, but he'll also be loved in a way that makes that strength bearable." Loved. The word hung between us, carrying implications neither of us was ready to address directly. but watching Cole watch our son, seeing the fierce protectiveness in his expression, I realized that love had already reshaped all of our lives in ways we were only beginning to understand. "When you leave tonight," I said, "I need you to promise me something." Cole turned to face me fully. "Promise me you'll come back. Whatever it takes, whatever compromises you have to make. Promise me you'll survive this and come home to Connor." "Catherine, promise me," I repeated, my voice carrying a desperation I couldn't hide. "Because if something happens to you, Connor loses his father before he ever really gets to know him." And I paused, struggling with words that felt too large and dangerous to speak aloud. "You what?" Cole asked softly. "I lose the chance to figure out what we could be," I finished. "All three of us. Together." Cole stepped closer, his hand reaching up to cup my face in a gesture that was both familiar and startling. "I promise," he said, his voice carrying the weight of an oath. "I'll come back to both of you." He kissed me then, soft and gentle and full of everything we hadn't been able to say. It tasted like possibility and fear, like coming home and stepping into the unknown simultaneously. When we broke apart, Connor stirred in his crib, making the soft sounds that meant he was waking up. Cole moved to lift him, holding our son with a natural ease that spoke of instincts that had nothing to do with experience and everything to do with love. "Hey, little man," he said softly. "Daddy's got to go take care of some things, but he'll be back before you wake up." Watching them together, this powerful, dangerous man holding his tiny, vulnerable son with infinite gentleness, I felt something shift inside my chest. Not just acceptance of our circumstances, but a fierce determination to protect what we were building together. "Be careful," I said as Cole handed Connor back to me. "Always am," he replied, though we both knew that careful was a relative term in his world. After he left, I settled into the nursery's rocking chair with Connor, watching the lights of his father's security team move across the property through the window. By morning, the threat against us would be eliminated or escalated beyond control. By morning, we would know whether the life we were trying to build together could survive the violent realities of Cole's world. But for now, in the quiet darkness before dawn, I held my son and waited for the man I was falling in love with all over again to return from a war being fought in our name. Some battles, I was learning, were worth fighting. Some risks were worth taking. And some loves were worth protecting, no matter the cost. Even when that cost was measured in blood and moral compromise and the loss of innocence that could never be reclaimed. Dawn came slowly over Puget Sound, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose that should have been beautiful, but felt ominous instead. I stood at the nursery window, Connor sleeping peacefully in my arms, watching the distant lights of boats moving across the water like fallen stars. Cole had been gone for 8 hours, and each minute of silence felt like an eternity measured in heartbeats and held breath. Elena appeared beside me with a cup of coffee, her presence as comforting as always. "He'll be back," she said quietly, as if reading my thoughts. "I've been with this family for 20 years, and I've never seen Cole fail to come home when he promised. 20 years. I tried to imagine 2 decades of nights like this one, of waiting for someone you cared about to return from confrontations that could end in violence or worse. Elena made it sound routine, just another part of loving someone whose business operated outside the boundaries of conventional morality. "How do you bear it?" I asked. "The not knowing, the constant worry about what might happen." Elena smiled, her expression carrying the wisdom of someone who'd found peace within chaos. "You learn that love is stronger than fear," she said simply, "and you learn to focus on what you can control rather than what you can't." What I could control. At the moment, that felt like very little beyond holding my son, and trusting that the man I'd chosen to build a life with would survive the night's work. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. For a moment, my heart leaped with hope that it was Cole, but the message that appeared made my blood turn to ice. "Your boyfriend killed my men. Now I kill your son. 30 minutes. The words blurred together as panic flooded my system. Volkov was here, had somehow bypassed Cole's security, was coming for Connor while his father was away, dealing with what we'd thought was the primary threat. "Elena," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the terror coursing through me. "We need to get Connor to the safe room, now." Elena's grandmother instincts transformed instantly into the steel-sharp awareness of someone who'd lived through genuine danger. She moved toward the nursery's panic button while I gathered Connor's essential medications, my hands shaking as I tried to calculate how long we could survive in the reinforced room in the estate's basement. The alarm system activated with a sound like distant thunder, flooding the property with harsh white light that turned the peaceful grounds into a stage set for violence. Through the window, I could see figures moving between the trees. Too many figures, moving with the coordinated precision of a military operation. Marcus burst through the nursery door, his expression grim but focused. "Safe room now," he commanded. "Volkov's brought at least a dozen men. We can hold them for maybe 20 minutes. 20 minutes. Either Cole would return in time or Connor and I would die in the basement of the house that was supposed to protect us. The mathematics of survival were brutal and simple. The safe room was a marvel of engineering paranoia. Reinforced steel walls, independent air supply, communications equipment that could reach law enforcement or Cole's team anywhere in the world. But as the heavy door sealed us inside, cutting off the sound of gunfire that had begun echoing across the property, it felt less like protection than like a tomb. Connor stirred in my arms, his fever from the latest chemotherapy making him restless and uncomfortable. Even in the midst of our crisis, his medical needs continued with relentless urgency. I gave him water through a syringe, checked his temperature, administered the medications that kept his small body fighting against the cancer that had started all of this. "Mama," he said, one of the few words he'd learned, his voice small and trusting in the artificial twilight of our refuge. "I'm here, baby," I whispered, rocking him gently despite the adrenaline making my entire body shake. "Daddy's coming. He promised he'd come back." Elena monitored the communications equipment, her expression growing more concerned as reports came in from Marcus and his team. Volkov's men were well armed and well trained, attacking with the kind of precision that suggested military experience. The estate's defenses were holding, but barely. "Where is Cole?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "His team is en route," Elena replied. 20 minutes out. 20 minutes that we might not have. Through the safe room's monitors, I could see muzzle flashes in the darkness, could see figures moving closer to the main house with each passing minute. Marcus and his men were outnumbered and outgunned, fighting a delaying action that couldn't last forever. Connor's breathing became labored, a side effect of stress combined with his medication regimen. I held him closer, whispering nonsense words of comfort, while my mind raced through scenarios that all ended in variations of disaster. "Elena," I said quietly, "if something happens to me, if Volkov's men get through, I need you to promise me something." The older woman's expression hardened. "Nothing is going to happen to you." "Promise me," I insisted. "Promise me you'll make sure Connor gets the medical care he needs, that his treatment continues, that he grows up knowing his father loved him enough to die protecting him." Elena's eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained steady. "I promise. But Catherine, you're going to tell him that yourself. Both of you are going to survive this." The lights in the safe room flickered as an explosion somewhere above us shook the entire structure. Connor began to cry, his distress triggering my own maternal panic. I bounced him gently, singing a lullaby my mother had sung to me, trying to create a pocket of peace within the storm of violence raging overhead. Through the communication system, Marcus's voice crackled with urgency. "They've breached the main house. estimate 5 minutes to the safe room location. 5 minutes. The countdown to disaster had become specific, immediate. I looked at Connor, at this innocent child who'd become a target through no fault of his own, and felt a rage so pure it burned away the fear. "How do I open this door?" I asked Elena. "Catherine, no, you can't." "They want Connor because he's mine," I said, my voice carrying a conviction that surprised me. "If I'm not here, if they can't use him as leverage against Cole, then he's just a sick baby who poses no threat to anyone." The logic was flawed and desperate, but it was the only plan I could think of that might save my son's life. If I could draw Volkov's attention away from the safe room, if I could make myself the primary target, then Connor might survive long enough for Cole to arrive. "Elena, take him," I said, placing Connor in her arms despite his protests. "Keep him quiet. Keep him safe. When Cole comes, tell him I'm sorry I couldn't wait for him to save us." I had just reached for the door control when the lights went out completely, plunging us into absolute darkness. Emergency lighting kicked in a moment later, bathing everything in hellish red that made Elena's face look like something from a nightmare. And then, through the communication system, I heard the most beautiful sound in the world. Cole's voice, cold and deadly, and very much alive. "Marcus, report. I'm on the property with reinforcements." Reinforcements. Cole hadn't just survived his confrontation with Volkov's operation. He'd returned with enough firepower to turn the tide of the battle raging above us. The sound of gunfire intensified, but now it was moving away from the house rather than toward it. "Catherine, are you there?" Cole's voice came through the safe room's intercom, and I nearly wept with relief. "We're here," I managed. "Connor's okay. We're both okay. Stay put until I give the all clear. Volkov's men are falling back, but there might be stragglers." The next 30 minutes passed in a blur of muffled explosions, distant gunfire, and the gradual silence that meant the immediate threat was over. When Cole finally appeared at the safe room door, his clothes torn and stained with what looked like blood, I didn't care about the violence he'd committed, or the men who'd died to protect us. I only cared that he'd kept his promise to come home. Connor reached for his father immediately, as if recognizing the source of safety and protection even at 10 months old. Cole gathered both of us into his arms, holding us with a desperation that spoke of how close we'd come to losing everything. "Is it over?" I asked against his shoulder. "Volkov's dead," Cole said simply. "His lieutenant, his operation, his threat to this family, all eliminated." Eliminated. The euphemism couldn't disguise what he was telling me, but I found I didn't care about the moral implications. Men who'd planned to kill my son were dead, and I felt nothing but relief. "What happens now?" I asked. Cole pulled back to look at me, his expression serious. "Now we go forward, together, as a family." A family. The word carried implications that went far beyond convenience or temporary arrangements for Connor's protection. It meant accepting Cole's world completely, understanding that violence would always be a possibility, that our love would exist within the shadow of criminal enterprise. But looking at Connor, healthy and safe in his father's arms, looking at Cole, who'd risked everything to protect us, I realized that some compromises were worth making. Some prices were worth paying. Some loves were worth fighting for, regardless of the moral complexity they created. "Yes," I said simply, "as a family." 6 months later, Connor's cancer was in complete remission. Dr. Reeves called it one of the most successful treatment outcomes she'd ever seen, attributing his recovery to the genetic advantages inherited from his father and the stress-free environment that had allowed his body to focus entirely on healing. We were married in a small ceremony at the estate, with Elena serving as Connor's honorary grandmother and Marcus standing as Cole's best man. Connor took his first steps in the garden overlooking the sound, his laughter echoing across the grounds that had once been a battleground, but had become our sanctuary. I learned to live with the moral ambiguity of loving a man whose business operated outside the law. Cole learned to share control, to include me in decisions that affected our family's safety and future. Together, we built something neither of us had expected when I'd first called him seeking medical information for a sick child. We built a love strong enough to survive anything: cancer and criminals, secrets and violence, the terrible choices that protecting a family sometimes required. And Connor grew up knowing that he was cherished beyond measure, protected without limit, and loved by parents who'd chosen each other and their family over every principle that had once seemed more important than being together. Some mistakes, I learned, weren't mistakes at all. They were just love disguised as crisis, family disguised as catastrophe, hope disguised as the most dangerous risk you could possibly take. Sometimes the bravest thing you could do was let yourself be saved by someone everyone else thought was dangerous. Sometimes love really was stronger than fear. And sometimes the only way to protect what mattered most was to embrace a world you'd never wanted to be part of and discover that it had been your home all along.